Good morning. Welcome to Norcal Malibraux. This is another Ramblings. As you would expect, I'm not getting any games in, so there is a definitive lack of battle reports to put videos together. We are coming to you today from the NorCal pandemic bunker here in the Bay Area. I hope everybody is staying healthy, practicing the proper protocols for social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. So, been sorry I didn't get anything out last week. Been struggling for a little inspiration on what to do. I did have the idea of doing something on Mayfang. Now, Mayfang's as I think everybody knows at this point, my primary faction is Guild. Oh, I'm sorry, not Guild. That's my secondary faction. Is Arcanist. How dare I? And the one master I haven't actually even played once in M3E is Mayfang, so I've been looking at her card a lot. I actually have most of the models, even those in the Bayou faction. And so thought it would be interesting to do a bit of a dive into Mayfang. But there's a lot of that content coming out right now in other sources. They're probably doing it better than I would give it some justice. And so decided to do something a little bit different for this one. Let's talk about one of the strats. So I'm going to talk about corrupted ley lines. I've played this strat more than any of the other ones in GG1. Now I don't have a ton of games given things shut down here pretty much a month ago in California, in the Bay Area specifically. I think we were the first to go on shelter in place in the country, and so there's been a lot of theory foe in my head as I looked at various builds, et cetera, with a couple of the games that I've played, sprinkling some experience in there. So, and the more I think about this particular strategy, the more interested I am in it. I think it's got some depth to it. I think that there are a number of different approaches. I think there's no right or wrong way, or there's always a wrong way, but there's no right way or specific way to jump into this. I think as we go through this, I would love to hear anybody else who's got thoughts on this particular strategy, anything I might have missed in going through it, so on. So let's start off with the ground rules for corrupted ley lines. I'm not going to read this. We're all familiar. I wanted to highlight a couple of items. We have a model that will be a lodestone carrier, carrying the lodestone token. Scoring or capping the strategy marker requires that model be touching it at the end of the turn, so it's not interacting or anything along those lines. Friendly controlled models within an inch of the friendly model with the lodestone can take an interact action to pass it to another model within line of sight. Very important, within line of sight and 6 inches. That includes, they can obviously do it themselves if need be. And then finally, if that lodestone token would be removed from the table, whether it's killed, buried, I don't know any other effects that removes a model from the table. Well, I guess replace is one. The lodestone token moves to the closest friendly model, ignoring line of sight. That's got some interesting elements. I actually used it in one of the battle reports. You could see me using that to pass the lodestone, purposely killing one of my models to pass the lodestone token through a big piece of impassable terrain to a closer model. And then finally, you get one for every cap strategy. To score, you have to have more capped strategy markers than you've scored already, et cetera, meaning, of the 5 markers out there, to get all 4 points, you're going to need to cap 4 of them. So I'm not going to pretend that I have any skill whatsoever to put together diagrams or anything like that. So I apologize ahead of time for the kindergarten level of my PowerPoint skills and being able to draw straight lines, et cetera. But here we are. We look at a table with the 5 strategy markers out where they need to be, and it's like, okay, so I'm curious, how far are these markers from each other? And so as we go through, the closest ones, and I took it measuring closest point to closest point, not from the center of the strat marker to the center of the strat marker, which is much easier to calculate, honestly. Um, but just closest point if you were touching the strat marker and so on. So this is 11.5 inches, almost on the nose. So a bit significant if you take a 30 millimeter model and you have it touching that closest point and it's a move 5, it can't actually reach that center marker in 2 walks. It will need some help getting there. The larger base markers can certainly get themselves there. Then we look at the farther ones from each other. This distance here, it's approximately, this one wasn't as easy to kind of measure out. It's about 17 inches. So again, even a move 6, 30 mil, probably could, walk 3 times to get there. Certainly a move 5 can't get there in 3 walks. So it will, a lot of models are going to need help reaching from one to the other, or we'll need to pass that lodestone along. This, of course, assumes that that there's no terrain in the way. You have severe terrain that can slow things down. You have blocking terrain that you may have to go around. You have models that may be in the way, et cetera, et cetera. So, this is kind of closest to closest, kind of give you some idea. And then you get into, generally everybody scores or caps the first strategy marker, nearest their deployment zone, and we'll look at deployment zones in a second here. But what's the next best strategy? Is it to go to the center, and then you have, which is close, and then you can go to another marker, which is also close, and then the final one, you got to take that long journey, or is it to try to get to one of the farther ones first, and then go to the center, and then you got, for your final 2 points, 2 short jumps. I don't think there's any right answer. Obviously the center marker is probably going to be the most contested. That's where crews are going to tend to congregate, I feel. In general, what I've done in the past is always try to go for a farther marker and have the center marker be my safety valve. So, as I'm making that, approximately 17-inch journey across with a lodestone carrier, whether it's a single one or I'm passing it forward, and late in the turn, that lodestone carrier gets killed and it gets passed to a model that hasn't activated, or even one that has, but I have the ability to kind of move it along. I find that I can get to that center one pretty easy. Those models are already kind of pretty close to that center, and so to me, that's I think I will tend, in most cases, again, dependent on terrain and everything and opponent's crews, but will favor going for taking the long walk first before going for that center. Also allows me to kind of grab the center and try to control it. With some of the crews that I play, Karis, I could throw. Karis is one. Both Karis and Tony, I feel like I can get into the center pretty fast and start contesting it. And controlling it. Both those are crews that can do a pretty good job. Yeah, Sandeep is my third master I play a lot, maybe not so much. Or maybe, it depends on what I summon and if they survive. So let's get into deployment zones and what it looks like. So, corner, here we are. This is actually one strat that I feel like, generally in corner deployment, I always feel the pressure to have a fast crew. I would be hesitant to take a Tony crew, say, into a corner, because I feel it's really important to get out of that corner as quickly as possible. But this is a strat that's not necessarily the case. In all these, you're always going to have a model that at least hangs behind to cap that close marker that's just outside the deployment zone. And so I think you got a little bit more time in this particular strategy in corner deployment. Schemes will matter. It's 4 points. You got to get across the halfway mark as quickly as you can. It's all dependent, but I don't quite feel the pressure to bring a fast crew in this strategy in corner. Looking at standard, again, 2 markers just outside the deployment zone. Probably pretty easy to set up to hit one and then the other. You've already got models that might already be there. This might be a good place to have a shooting model near the other one that can just stand there and shoot away and blaze away, and then on turn 2 help you cap it. So I don't think there's anything really tricksy there. I think wedge is about the same. It's you've gonna get some heavy hitters maybe closer to the middle to try to contend with the center objective. Flank is interesting. This is the one that you actually have a strategy marker in your deployment zone, though I believe you can't start touching it or deploy touching it. It doesn't really matter. You're gonna need to be there at the end anyways. But you are really close to other markers, especially the 2 on the end. This here is 8.5. It's the same distance as here. So no, looks like I jumped ahead. Anyways, couldn't finish that thought there. I haven't played it in flank, and so I do think this is one that definitely incents you to go for one of the quote farther markers rather than the center early in the game. So we're going to get into strategies. And so I've got 3 of them. The first one I call the bagman. The second one I call the play. And the third one, quantity has a quality of its own. And then finally, I'm going to go into some denial strategies. There's a lot of mix and match in this, but I wanted to kind of simplify some of my ideas. So what do I mean when I say bagman? This is my little shorthand for a strategy centered around using a single model dedicated to capping the strat markers. It's got some advantages when I think about this approach. The primary one is that you've got the whole rest of the crew. Now, obviously, probably an element of this crew will be used to support that single model, whether it's in pushes or heals or whatever the case may be. But that crew is also available for denying the enemy the strat and running schemes. You're not investing a ton of points into the strat itself. I do think it's if you can pull that off, it's a big advantage and should be able to provide you with an advantage somewhere else on the board. A model, a characteristic of a bagman model, obviously fast. You want something fast, whether it's in raw move stat, has inherent pushes, is unimpeded, and then of course incorporeal being one of the probably better ones for this model. Something that I didn't go over in the ground rules, a lodestone carrier cannot place. That means that model cannot fly, nor can it leap, which are the 2 common ways models improve their speed, so to speak. Any other abilities that would place the model, I'm thinking of rail walk for the metal golem, can't do it. Takes that out. And so a lot of the abilities that make models fast aren't available if you carry the lodestone. And so having some of these other ones become a little bit more important. I do think the model needs to be tough or have very good defensive kit, hopefully both. Some of the abilities that just right off the bat might be useful. Stealth, not being able to be targeted from outside of 6 inches is very important, especially since lures are going to be a key feature in denial or just shooting the model down. They got to come get that model. Butterfly jump's another handy one. Being able to, at the end of the attack, to move along might help with the speed there. They may do you that favor. But everything else, whether it's armor or incorporeal or shielded or anything that makes these things, or just raw good defensive stats, I think these are all things that will help keep that model alive. And then finally, there's a singular ability, laugh off. I think it's extremely important. Not being able to be moved by another model unless you want to be is going to be golden in this particular strategy. Now, crews that are the bagman is centered around will often have pushes, obeys. Both of these are important in supporting the bagman. They're also important in denying the opponent from scoring the strat. And then obviously heals to help keep that bagman model alive. And then finally, this is a bit of an eggs in one basket approach. So have a backup plan. That's the one thing I will say. It can make your crew efficient, but if it goes down, especially a little earlier than you wanted it to, then you're stuck scrambling if you don't have that backup plan. So the play, what do I mean by the play? And so those who are not up to date on the history of crappy college football programs, back in 1982, the University of California was playing Stanford in the big game, their annual rivalry game. We're down with 4 seconds left. Stanford kicked off, and the Cal Bears would, during that ensuing kickoff, lateral or toss the football to a teammate 5 times during the play, and it is called the play. To score the game-winning touchdown. We see the Stanford band here has run onto the field assuming they were going to win, and came to an untimely end. And so when I think about the other way I would score the strategy, it's tossing that lodestone around from model to model, and it just harkens back. I happen to be at this game. I will not tell you all how old I was at the time. I was not in college, so. But it was a pretty exciting moment in sports for me, and this strategy just makes me feel like I'm at the game checking the football around. So as I said, involves many models touching the lodestone. That's kind of the basic key element of this particular approach to the strategy. Common characteristics of crews, fast models of all sorts. So this is where leaps and flight can help, because you're trying to set up that next model that's going to receive the lodestone, or run up and interact and help that model that's carrying the lodestone pass it to the next model. I do think interact abilities are important. I think of, don't mind me. The problem with interacting is if you're engaged, generally you can't interact, therefore you can't toss the lodestone. So don't mind me would be helpful. So in Arcanist again, collect crews, collect models or performer models might be good choices here if taking this approach. I think about for Outcast Parker. Right, where Parker is, shooting, and then can I think discard a card or something along those lines to have a model in line of sight interact. That seems like a pretty powerful ability in this particular approach to corrupted ley lines. So anything that really spices up interacts, I think, can be useful in this. And there's a lot of them in this game, a lot of them. I think that this approach rewards thinking ahead. You're trying to position that next model to receive the lodestone, or what is that next model that's going to receive the lodestone going to do? You do need to think, several plays ahead, several destinations ahead. If you don't, you can end up finding yourself with the lodestone where you don't want it, particularly if that model gets killed. Which gets me to my last point. Always try to keep the next carrier of the lodestone that you want to be the closest model. So if I'm advancing that lodestone, and my thought is I'm going to chuck it over to the next model. If my opponent comes in and kills that lodestone carrier, and that next model is not the closest, that lodestone can end up going backwards, or going somewhere I didn't want to go. So you really need to think this through on positioning. This is a bit of advantage of the bagman. You don't have to quite be as forward thinking with the bagman. You're just trying to get that guy from point A to point B, and your crew is and your strategy revolves around this. This one you're trying to create chains of models or different runners of the ball here, so to speak. I'm a sports ball guy. I'm sorry, I I'm not going to apologize for that. So those who aren't into sports ball, sorry, but this strat just screams sports metaphors to me. So I do apologize. Nah, I don't really. Sorry about that, guys. Everybody, I should say. So the quantity has a quality of its own. This one is pretty short. It's not much different than the play, just maybe the crew characteristics. Rather than having a lot of fast models, maybe this is a lot of models. It's obviously likely going to be used by summoners who can just keep pumping models out, and if you go and you kill those models, they can resummon them. I know a lot of people, including myself, don't necessarily want to target a summon model because that limited upgrade gets back into the pool, and the summoner can just bring it right back. Well, if they're carrying the lodestone, then you got to think about killing them. If you're going this approach, if you have a way to attack enemy pass tokens, that might be important. That as we get into denial, I think going last is a big part of this particular strategy. All right, let's get into denial. There's a lot of ways and approaches to denying this particular strat. The biggest thing to remember is your opponent needs to have the lodestone carrier touching that strategy marker at the end of the turn to cap it. So your efforts are going to be to prevent that. I do think in general it's really tough to force a 0 on your opponent. I think that first point for this strat is just very, very, very easy. And just accept that, and maybe even the second one. It's, I think, getting into the third and fourth when things get mixed up, when model counts get thin, as they start to die, that you can really focus on stopping it. The other is, if you can prevent him from capping, him or her from capping twice, 2 turns in a row, that gives you a huge leg up. So the first is activation control. Since the important element of the strat is having that model touching at the end of the turn, you going last means you'll have an opportunity in some way to affect your opponent's model while it's touching that marker. And whether it's to kill it, get it off the strat marker, et cetera, whatever approach you're taking, you have that opportunity and your opponent doesn't. Hopefully, maybe you can move yours on if need be. I do think one tool in the toolbox that is just, screams, hey, take me, is lures. Generally, these are 12-inch range nowadays. But it's one way, once that model's activated and it's touching and you can pull it off, you have a lot more control. Another is pushes, pulls. I don't think there's pulls left in the game. Maybe that's an old M2E thing. Everything's a push, especially pushes that are not resisted. I think about Kojo's root sign language. Now those tend to be extremely short ranges. But there's a lot of models with the ability to pulse out, push all enemy models within 3 inches, 2 inches, right? It's harder to get those models in position. The last thing you want to do is push it right back into the strat marker. But if you can get something that isn't resisted, the only way they can stop it is to have a model with laugh off. Obeys, same reason. Now, here's an important thing which we didn't go over the ground rules. It is to pass the ball or to take an interact action, it must be a friendly controlled model taking that interaction action. So you cannot obey a model to chuck the stone because you are controlling that action. With that said, you can obey the model to walk away, to whatever it is. Just put it in a bad position. So obeys, I think, are important. By the way, these 3 are also handy for you moving your own models into position. So I do think a lot of corrupted leyline crews will have some form of this, whether it's offensive or defensive, doesn't matter. I think range damage is probably a little bit more important than melee-centric crews. Now, I play almost entirely melee-centric crews, so I've trying to think about this. There isn't a lot of range, other than Raspy in Arcanist. Uh, the and the reason I have for this is, you got that model that's heading towards that strat marker, and you send your big beater, goes, kills it, does a great job, and that lodestone flips somewhere else. But the problem is now your beater is sitting somewhere maybe that it doesn't want to be. Do you want it sitting there just guarding that strat marker? No, you want to bring it in to kill. And this strat, and what I saw in both my games, is when something like that happens, the focus of the battle can shift very quickly. So yeah, it only goes 6 inches away to another model, but if that model hasn't activated, it could be heading the other way. It could be heading into the center, and then from the center they can go in any direction, and your beater now is near one of the corner markers. So my thought is, with range damage, you're shooting those lodestone carriers down. It pops. You're still standing there. You can still keep gunning away. It just gives you a bigger area that you can deal the damage out. Abilities that mess with interacts, I think you gotta give this a lot of thought. And even if it can't stop them, and there's very few. There's Nellie's got some in her crew, but you got to that's 2 inches away. Where if they take an interact action, the 2 or 3, it's very short range, which begs, can they even interact if they're engaged? With that said, if they take an interact action, Nellie can control it. So therefore you're tossing the lodestone marker somewhere, or I don't know how that would interact. I have to think that out. But other ones where enemy model within 6 inches doesn't interact, you get a focus or draw a card or whatever. In those strategies, there's going to be a lot of interacting in this strategy, irregardless of the scheme. I think even if you take a bagman approach, there's still going to be some. So, and then if you can have a chatty Aurora up where they get discard a card, so they can still do it, but there's a penalty, the cost that they have to do, and resource drain on them. These things I think will be very useful. Terrain creation. Ice pillars for Raspy, or was the Carrion Emissary with their, I don't know what they're called, but they've got that destructible terrain, pretty big ones, 50 mils that they throw out. Whether it's blocking terrain like that to seal off strat markers that your opponent seems to be going for, or just makes it more inefficient where they got to go around them, or even just things like dust markers, which I think are severe terrain, where it takes more AP to get through those, will be useful in helping to deny. Again, it's trying, these last couple ones are more about making your enemy crew more inefficient in their approach. And the more inefficient, the more AP they have to expend to get those points. The less AP they have to deny you, the less AP they have to score their schemes. So I hope you all enjoyed this kind of, I'll call it a deep dive or first impression using some of the other podcasts topics into a strat rather than a crew. I would be really interested in hearing other people's thoughts. So if you have any, feel free to post them either on Weird Place, when I post this that this video's up, or in the comments section of the YouTube here. Right now, my life is Theoryfo. Some of the other Norcal Malibraux fellas are figuring out Vassal, and unfortunately, with my current position, I just don't have the time. Hopefully, maybe in 10 days, when things kind of ease a little bit here, I'll be able to get some Vassal games. They can teach me how to do Vassal, and I can start putting some of this Theoryfo to work. Anyways, so keep flipping those cards. Stay healthy out there, everybody, and we'll see you next time.